Hello everyone, my name is Ana Valéria de Pierre Alvarez, and today I'll be presenting my research titled as How to Decrease Multitasking Behavior Among Students During Learning Processes. First, introducing myself. I am a master's student in design at the Design Postgraduate Program from Federal University of Paraná, located in Curitiba, Brazil. The theme of my master dissertation surrounds how the multitasking context impacts the learner's interaction with learning applications. So my presentation today is part of this research. My research line in the program is Information Systems, and my research group is the Digital and Information Design represented by the professor Carlos Pinillo, and my thesis advisor is the professor Juliana Bueno. Beginning with the context of this presentation, we can start observing the increasing usage of digital technologies in our daily basis. Devices like smartphones, tablets, personal computers, and other communication technologies keep growing and expanding, and the usage of all of these devices produces more and more information every day. This information volume impacts directly in the way people live. Since the popularization of the internet, we start to change the way we work, the way we have fun, do shopping, interact with others, communicate, and also the way we learn and study, and what we choose to pay attention on. So we see that over the years, the amount of data that we are exposed have drastically grown, letting us information overloaded. The ubiquitous digital technologies around us let us constantly surrounded in digital informations. This amount of information can get us cognitive overloaded, and for being in contact with this amount of information, we need to manage our attention because we feel the need to respond to the various stimuli around us. And sometimes, while trying to manage our attention, we end up splitting it. When we split our attention, changing fastly our focus in different contexts or activities, it is natural that we lost some information in the way, because we should process only one stimulus at a time. Cognitively, having to split our attention in more than one task at a time, doing multitasking, it affects our performance. It makes us have a lower performance in each task because our attention capacities are limited. Making multitask demands a higher consumption of mental resources because the brain activity that is involved in doing two activities at the same time is even higher than the resources that would be needed to do both tasks separated. So when we do more than one task, our brain switches from one context to another, making an illusion that both tasks are being processed and executed together at the same time. But both tasks share the same brain resource. While doing two or more tasks, the brain processes the information at a much slower rate, and that's why it affects our task performances. When we consider activities related to education, when one of the performed multitasks involves learning, the cognitive overload generated by the amount of information the learners receive, it makes the learning process harder. Although the use of digital technologies allow a lot of great possibilities in the education field, it also can harm the learning process. The amount of digital information that the students receive can distract them, making it harder for them to maintain focus on the studied content. Even though they keep being distracted by these external stimuli like notifications, pop-ups, text messages, or social media interactions, the decision to properly allocate their attention on the studied content during the learning process, it is their decision to make. So, knowing that doing more than one task at the same time can lower the student performance, what can the educators do to help the learning process? Considering this problematic, the defined research question was how to decrease multitasking behavior among students during learning processes. From that, the defined research goal was to gather recommendations for attention during learning. And to reach this goal, the applied methodology was an unsystematic bibliographic review. This method is a form of investigative research that doesn't require a structured execution, allowing the research for theories familiar to the research question, familiar theories, being thus widely used among researchers in the design field. In this review, it was researched about multitasking behavior, cognitive impacts, and more specifically about multitasking during learning processes. Through the research, it was collected 6 main results, being 1 about multitasking behavior and its cognitive effects, and 5 about multitasking during learning processes. Now I will specify a bit about each one of these findings. The selected article about multitasking behavior and its cognitive effects was the only one written in Portuguese, named as Estudos Comportamentais de Neuroimagem sobre Multitarefa, uma revisão de literatura, that can be translated as Behavioral and Neuroimaging Studies on Multitasking, a Literature Review. It was written by 2 Brazilian researchers, Bailer and Tomitch. In the article, they do a bibliographic review about behavior studies and also neuroimaging during multitasking, considering that at least one of the involved tasks was a language activity. They reviewed 6 behavior studies and 5 neuroimaging studies. And with it, they investigated the listening comprehension, bilingualism, the role of intelligent and working memory capacity, the effects of training, and multitasking choices in different generations. Some of the references that appeared in their research also appeared in our research, like Bauman and Ellis, Daniels, and Jaregui. Considering the multitasking ubiquity and its effects in learning processes, the authors defend that teachers and educators should understand the negative effects of multitasking during learning and try to talk to their students about the usage and limitations of multitasking to help them to be literated in digital media. Now, let's see the research results that approached multitasking during learning. The first one is Bauman's article, named as Can Students Really Multitask? An experimental study of instant messaging while reading. In their study, they investigate the instant messaging impacts in students while reading. To do that, they did an experiment with 89 university students that had to read while receiving and answering messages. As expected, the result was that the students that had to split their attention between messaging and reading, they took longer to read the text. It was also expected that these students would comprehend the text in a more superficial way, but it wasn't significant differences in the comprehension text performances. The authors commented that the use of electronic media is something promising for education by allowing to spread a lot of information and reach more students. But they also warned that educators must be aware of the risks posed by these technologies. The second article that approaches learning during multitasking is named as The Effects of Multitasking on the Grade Performance of Business Students, written by Ellis, Daniels, and Jaregui. They did a study to examine whether multitasking in class affects the grade performance of business students. For that, they conducted an experiment with 62 undergraduate business students, where they had to participate in a class lecture and answer a quiz about the content in the end. One half of the students was supposed to keep texting during class, splitting their attention with the lecture and with the texts. And the other half was supposed to focus only on the lecture, which was the control group. The research findings showed that students who text in class were significantly lower than the exam scores of the students who only focus in the class lecture. The author suggested that educators use these findings as available information about the effects of multitasking in learning situation, and as evidence that doing multitasking learning environments have its costs. The third article that approaches learning during multitasking is about M-learning, and its name is Mobile Learning: Can Students Really Multitask?, written by Coins, Buchweitz, and Clarbolt. With this study, they aimed to address the effects of multitasking on learning with a mobile device. To do that, they did an experiment with 97 students, where some had to combine a learning task with a secondary task. The learning task was to watch movies on an iPod, and the secondary task was tightening bolts and nuts. The control group only had to perform the learning task. After the tests, both groups had to complete a learning test, and also the group that multitasked received a tightening score. In their findings, the researchers noticed that multitasking didn't significantly affect the learning score. So, in a second experiment with 80 students, the researchers gave different instructions to them. Some were asked to make the learning task as good as possible, to focus on it. Some were asked to do the typing task as good as possible, and some were asked to deliver as good as possible in both tasks. This time, they noticed a difference between students of the control group that didn't have to combine learning and typing tasks, and the students who focus on the typing task while learning. The authors didn't recommend any action to avoid lower learning performance during multitasking. They only signalized that the need of further research to verify when students are capable of addressing two tasks simultaneously in an efficient and effective way. The fourth article that approaches learning during multitasking is also about mobile phone usage, and its name is Does Multitasking with Mobile Phones Affect Learning? A review by Shane and Young. Like Bailer and Tomitch's article, this one is a bibliographic review. The author said that it attempts to review how and why does mobile phone multitasking impair learning, and how to prevent distraction from it. For that, they selected 132 studies, published from 1999 and 2014. From that, they reviewed three major aspects: distraction sources like phone ringing, texting, and social apps, distraction targets like reading and attending the phone, and distraction subjects like personality, gender, and culture. About how to prevent distraction triggered by the mobile phones, the author suggested to raise public awareness, including educators and students, and also to practice dual task skills to improve performance over time. The last result of the research was a book chapter that approaches multitasking and M-learning. Its name is Mindfulness in Mobile and Ubiquitous Learning: Harnessing the Power of Attention by Palalas. The author explains how we can get distracted and digitally overwhelmed by the constant inflow of information. From that, she presents recommendations on how to promote higher levels of attention and engagement in M-learning activities. The main attention literacy strategy presented is mindfulness. Mindfulness can be defined as a practice of intentionally paying attention, a way to allocate full attention to the present moment. The author presents the strategy as an essential practice for education. She defends that teachers, experts, and instructional designers should guide the students to optimize their time, brain, and mind capacities. and that the students should be digital literacy and attention literacy, skills that are essential to an effective learning experience. Now, considering the research question, how to decrease multitasking behavior among students during the learning process, and through the unsystematic bibliographic review, it was possible to gather these following recommendations. First, about teachers and educators. They should understand the negative effects of multitasking during learning. They should aware their students about the risks of multitasking during learning, and they should guide the students to optimize their time, brain, and mind capacities. Second, students and learners, they should be digital literacy and attention literacy. They should practice dual task skills to improve performance over time, and they should practice mindfulness during learning. Now, as Alice, Daniels, and Jareggi pointed, there are many opportunities for future concerning multitasking in a learning environment. So now for future research, it can be brought more precise recommendations according to the learner's context, differentiating the mobile learners, the remote, distance, and presential learners. And for now, that's it. Those are my references. And thank you for watching.